We good?
All right, 2 more talks to go. This is going to be great. So, yeah. So Jason Rhodes has made his way all the way from Baltimore. He's the lead developer at Johns Hopkins University. And he started the NodeSchool in Baltimore, and he's going to tell us a story of doing that, how it worked, and what he learned from it. So everybody, welcome Jason.
So I'd like to give you guys a lot of credit for being here and congratulate myself for not tripping up these steps. So I think we're off to a great start already. So I'm hoping we can keep that going. Yeah, so like you said, I'm from Baltimore. I'd like to make it very clear I did not start NodeSchool itself. I wish I had. But I'm just a very excited organizer in Baltimore, and we've got an event going there, and I like it a lot. So yeah, this is about starting from the bottom, which I'll explain as we go. And just as that relates to NodeSchool and especially community in general, we've heard a lot of talks about that. I think I'd like to kind of weave in with a couple of those that you've heard already. So community, I think it's one of those words that you think you know what it means until someone asks you to define it, and then you kind of start to fumble and figure out what does it actually mean. So whenever I come across a situation like that, I like to take Jack Handy's advice and split a word into its parts. So I've done that with community. So we've got commu and entity. So what do these words mean? It's a mystery, and that's why I think community is a mystery. And I think that's as good of an explanation as I've ever heard, really, so I'm good with it. I do think community is kind of a mystery in the sense that we're all just trying to figure it out as we go. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think we should start more things and why our bottoms matter, and I hope I have your attention there. We'll figure it out as we go. I'll explain it as we go. All right, so like I've been saying, we have an event in Baltimore. Real quick, I'll point out that the font we're using right there, Potch put it together, so you can get it. Free font, pretty cool. So yeah, who's been to a NodeSchool event? Raise your hand. Cool, and how many of you have at least heard of it, know what it is? Awesome, yeah. So there's a good mix. If you don't know what it is, I would encourage you to go nodeup.com and listen to the NodeUp podcast number 55, where they spend an entire podcast kind of explaining what it is. This is where I heard of it. Great. I moved that earlier so that it would not be in. So that's great. It's perfect. So yeah, go to nodeup.com/55 and listen. It's pretty awesome. But the very short explanation is it's a loosely connected set of command line based lessons that teach you Node, teach you JavaScript, and then there's more lessons being added all the time, things like Git, and all kinds of stuff in there. And a community has sprung up around these lessons that involves getting together as a group and going through them just together, which doesn't sound like it's that interesting of a thing. But what stood out to me was that Max Ogden on that podcast I just told you to listen to described it as a little bit of a spin on the traditional meetup format. And as I was driving that day, that was what caught my attention, because I've been involved in meetups and tech community for a long time. And I don't have anything against the regular meetup. I think we've heard a lot of good talks about ways that we can do a good job with that. But I do think that even Jason was saying yesterday is that there's room for us to kind of experiment with this format and mix it up and do some new things. And I think that the fact that NodeSchool kind of does that puts it in a pretty cool spot. So what am I talking about with these problems, or what are my concerns, or why maybe I haven't clicked with traditional meetups? So first of all, finding speakers is really hard. In my experience, but you may have a different experience, but in my experience, speakers is always finding speakers is always the bottleneck. So a lot of times meetups will go away, not because there aren't people to come to them, because people are really excited to come, but finding a speaker is really hard to do on a monthly basis. So, it's all well and good to say, no, anyone can talk about anything, just come and talk to me afterwards. Doesn't matter what you talk about, just come on up. But it's bullshit because no one does it, right? So that's just a really hard thing to kind of make it work. If you find speakers, how many people know what this is? I hope, right? So this is TMNT, Ninja Turtles arcade game, original. I grew up playing this thing a ton. I wanted to show you a slide here that had an arcade game with difficulty levels that you choose. And as I was looking for an image, this popped up, and I was so happy I just had to use it even though it didn't demonstrate what I wanted to demonstrate. So whatever. But the idea here is that once you find speakers for your event, now you have to figure out what audience you're pitching to. What difficulty level do you want to set it to? And Jason was saying yesterday, it's hard to do a lot of beginner talks because people who are a little more advanced are going to get more bored there. And we found that to be very true. But then you're always excluding beginners too, and it's just really hard. So some people are picking to do 2 talks. So my friend in Philly is doing 2 talks every event. One is a little more advanced, one's a little more for beginners, which I think is an interesting way to go about it. But now you've doubled your workload for the speakers you need to book, and you're now alienating your entire crowd just for half the time each, right? So it's a kind of a hard problem to solve, right? This is one way to do it, but I don't know that there's a really good way in that format. And the third thing is, if you get speakers and you get audience, when you're coming together for an hour and a half, or one night after everyone's been at work all day, the lecture format has some, I don't want to say problems, but it leaves some things to be desired, because it works for delivering information, but it doesn't work for community interaction. And if we want to interact with each other, that always happens afterwards across the street, right, at the bar, which you can probably see all the problems with that for people who don't have the time to go out afterwards, who don't want to hang out in a bar. We're already immediately excluding them from the interaction part, which for me has always been the best part of a meetup. And so what are we doing to kind of fix that? I don't really know that NodeSchool set out to fix any of these problems. I heard about it. I thought it was awesome. We started one, and we just kind of realized that, at least for us, totally by accident, we had solved a couple problems and uncovered some cool things it was doing. So that's what I kind of want to share here. So number one, there's no speaker, obviously. So it's a bunch of people come into a room who want to learn Node, and then some other people who you've asked to come in advance who are there to help teach them Node, right? And that's basically the whole structure of the event. So we do ours for about 4 hours, and you might say, on a weekend day, and so you might say, well, isn't finding mentors just as hard as finding speakers? And I would tell you, absolutely not. That to try to get somebody to commit to 4 hours of mentoring is about 100 times easier than getting them to commit to even just 20 minutes of public speaking. So mentors just pour in. We've had no problem getting them at all. And it just worked out really great. So we don't have that constant struggle of making sure we find speakers. Because you can reuse the same mentors every event, too, if they want to come. The second thing about skill levels, this is a really magical symbiotic relationship that you were just hearing about a little bit earlier today. So the people who take or go through the course, they do a survey afterwards, and the number one thing that they say is that the mentors were awesome. It was like the best thing that they've ever experienced, to the point where sometimes they feel guilty for having monopolized their time for too long or something. But on the flip side of that, every mentor comes up to me and says, that was the greatest thing I've ever done. It was so cool. So there's just this really awesome interaction happening where you're not segmenting your audience and saying, okay, well, we're going to talk to advanced people by themselves and give them one message, and then we'll talk to beginners so we don't alienate. Like, the actual nature of the event is putting them together and making them work together, and they're having a great time. And I love that. I think that's so awesome. And then the third thing is just the interaction, which I think is probably obvious, that people are talking to mentors and asking them questions. People are talking to each other and helping them through the lessons that they've already gotten through. So there's already natural interaction built into the event. There's always about 15 minutes at the front where it's a little awkward, and then it kind of ramps up and it just magically starts happening where people are talking and laughing and having a great time for the rest of the event. Part of what helps that, I think, is that we do the pair programming model for our event. So when they register, we have them tell us a few things about their comfortability with JavaScript, and then we give them different colored name tags when they come in, and just ask them to find someone else with the same color name tag. And then we have them in pairs, and we say, all right, we're going to start the event. We kind of give a little bit of a talk to set the stage, and then we have one person be driver, one person be navigator. That person will close their laptop, and then they have to work together. And the first time we did that, we thought this might be a horrible disaster and crash really hard. But people loved it. They really got, after about 20 minutes, they started to understand how it worked. And then the second thing that they talk about in all their surveys is, that partner programming thing was so awesome. And so it's been a really, really positive thing. So with anything, as we do it a little more, you uncover the bad parts of something as well. And so we have run into a few of those, and I wanted to make sure I was being fair. So we'll say that there is a really steep learning curve. It wasn't really designed, as far as I understand it, for people who don't really know anything, and yet we're kind of pitching it to anyone who wants to come. So we have a problem where people who don't at least know a foundation of JavaScript, that they aren't able to really get as much out of the course. which is funny in some ways because as mentors, we are happy to help those people as well, and we think that they actually make significant progress by the end of the event, but their surveys are typically feeling really frustrated and overwhelmed because they see it a different way. So they're thinking, you know, this is really overwhelming. No matter how much progress they've made, they're still feeling frustrated. So I think there's work to do there, and that's just because it wasn't designed for that. We're using it for something that it really wasn't designed for. And so I think there's a lot of space for us to kind of think about other educational ramps to get onboard people into that process. The second thing is just about the community and the event. Like, the community doesn't really extend outside of the event right now, which I think is kind of sad, because you've got these people who are really into learning together and kind of forming a small relationship, and then they leave and they probably never talk to each other again. So thinking about how we could extend that, someone at one time suggested using something more like meetup.com. I'm not really sure that really solves our problem, so I think there may be some space here for some kind of service that allows, there may be already things that exist that I don't know about. But in the mentoring talk before, they were talking about more long-term mentoring relationships, which I think could be one way that this kind of extends outside of this event. And, you know, this is just one shakeup. I don't pretend that NodeSchool is the ultimate, we should switch over from meetups to all node schools and then we'll be fine. Like, I think the idea is that we're going to try and start more things. And so I'm excited to see how that happens. Now, it's true that NodeSchool, everything that is out there, all these lessons and the format and everything is open source. So that means, you know, in one way we're thinking we could fix these problems. We can work together. It's open source community. It's all working together. It's so great. But there's another side of it that I've been learning, and this is kind of the other part that I want to share. You could say it a couple ways, but we all have different bottoms, right? So what I mean by this is we all start in a different place, right? So my bottom looked a little like this. I got started with programming, doing Microsoft Access queries in a research firm. So you know, take that as you will. It was a lot of fun. I went through there and I ended up teaching myself a lot of things, much like many of you in this room probably have the exact same story. And there was a time when I was really proud of that story and saying, you know, oh, I taught myself and I learned this stuff myself and how great that was. And then as I examined it more and more, I realized that there were a lot of things in my past and like just based on who I am and where I grew up that kind of gave me opportunities that allowed me to have the time in the evenings to teach myself. There was just a study that came out in the Atlantic the other day, or they published about it. It said that having a white-sounding first name is the equivalent of 8 years of work experience on your resume when you apply to a job. Not in the tech industry specifically, but just in general. So that's a pretty nice perk that you know, you have to kind of think about as the point here saying where you started affects where you are. And as we're thinking about how community works, this is a big thing to start thinking about. I'll hopefully kind of tie it together in a minute. So the other example I wanted to talk about with this exact same thing is this is Drake, the rapper. The title of my talk is from a song that he does called Started From the Bottom. This is Degrassi. There are a lot of people here from Canada, right? My understanding is that if you grew up in Canada, the government mandated that you watch this show, I think. This is a Canadian teen drama, and that right there is Drake the rapper, which I imagine creates some really cool conversations with his other friends when he's trying to talk about where he started from. You know, this is part of where he started from. Now, I don't want to say that I know how hard his life was or anything like that. I'm not making any pronouncements. But the point here is no matter where the bottom of your story is, someone else started even bottomer, if you let me make that word up. So if you think of it like a ladder, and we're all climbing up at different paces, and we're all having taking different speeds, where you start is one aspect of where you end up. And that was just something that was really interesting for me to come to grips with, because I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's just a very simple thing. You know, where you start has an effect on where you end up. And then someone I was talking to about that was like, oh, yeah, that's a well-known thing. It's called privilege, right? And that's a bad word around here. And so that was really hard for me, right? Because I was like, what? I hate that word. I don't want that word applied to me at all. Because when I grew up, I thought of privilege as being things like this, right? Like, privilege is not a preppy guy wearing a pink sweater around his neck or a popped collar. And this illustration is known as Edgar Allan Bro. And I have a really soft spot in my heart for Edgar Allan Poe, so I love it. But yeah, Edgar Allan Bro is not privilege either. And privilege is not Billy Zabka. Oh man, my awesome hashtag is cut off. Privilege is not Billy Zabka. You know, it's not being a rich bully who beats people up. Like, these are things in my head that I associated with this kind of concept. And so if it was applied to me, of course I was going to have a really negative reaction. But really, I mean, there's more to it than this, but ultimately it's just a difference in where you started. And that's okay to accept that. So why am I talking about that when I'm talking about NodeSchool? I'm sure you're confused. The point for me was that if we are organizing events, and the people in this room are the people, you know, just by nature of being at this conference and being at this kind of community, that we're going to go out and we're going to be organizing more events. And if we're going to be doing that and we're going to be experimenting with these formats, it's not enough to just put up a registration form and say it's open and we're done. I think we have to do more than that. We have to think about ways to make the community more than what it already is and what it will already be just by its momentum. This is kind of an idea of privilege being leverage, right? So how can we use what we have collectively to make something better? And I think the way that I've been dealing with this as I talk to people in our community is if we want to make things better, we want to listen more, we want to think more, and we want to argue less. And it sounds really trite, but as we've been working on this, we've ended up coming up with solutions to problems that we had no idea that we had. So I'm going to give you some examples of that. This is my oldest son with his two best friends, and they're having an awesome time at childcare. We are thinking about providing childcare at NodeSchool. We haven't really figured it out completely yet, but we're thinking about it. It won't be nearly this fun, I'm sure, but just having it there, I think, could be an awesome way. We've heard some people say that they can't come because they can't get someone to watch their kids. Well, why not provide that as a service? It seems like it's something we could do. Right. This is a conference. I think it may have been from Ada Camp here. I can't remember exactly if that's where it was. But this is just blue tape on the floor to show where people who are in a wheelchair or some other device can go through so that if you're all talking and conversing in the hallways, they're not inconveniencing everyone to try to get through that hallway. And this is a quote from someone at, I don't know if they were at this conference, Liz Henry, who said that she was just blown away by the fact that, like, that someone had thought about this and done it for her. And it's just crazy to me that someone just took 20 minutes or 10 minutes to put blue tape on the floor, and someone else is, blown away by that. This is not an amazingly hard thing to do. Things like gender labels on bathrooms. People are thinking about these things more and more. Codes of conduct, like we've all heard of. Understanding why you would need a code of conduct, why you would want to have it, rather than just pulling it over from somewhere else. Different snack options, simple things, gluten-free, vegan, vegetarian, and something is really, really easy. This is feedback we got at our event. People have different allergies, so what about just leaving the snacks in the bags where it have all the ingredients written on them, and then they can just figure it out for themselves, right? Silly stuff, right? This is not a hard bar to get over, right? But we are just keep hitting it and hitting it. We're that pig, like constantly over and over, and maybe not all of you, but I know I definitely have felt that way of just constantly doomed like this guy to forever run over that hurdle forever and ever in his life. And all it takes to fix it is a little bit of listening, right? A little bit of putting down that first notion to argue and actually just listen and think about something. And the problem with that is that we can't really listen if nobody wants to come around and talk, or no one feels safe telling us what they're thinking. Right? So it's kind of a circle of listening and making a safe space, and listening and making a safe space. So I think we can do better than this guy. I really do. I think this is a low bar for us to clear, and I think we should try. I just want you to know, though, that it might take a dog. I know a lot of you guys are friendly with cats, so I'm going to go ahead and promote the dog side of things here. Might take a dog to help, but I think we can do it. And, start a NodeSchool. If you don't have one around you, go to one, be a mentor, and as you're involved in community and as you're taking part in experimenting with the format, just remember that there are things that matter, and we can think about them and make them better. So thank you, guys.